Good morning and welcome to the celebration of life for Dr. Paul Solomon. I am Paul's stepdaughter, Sue Lasapio, and I would like to just welcome you today. And we're going to start with Phil Solomon, Paul Solomon's wife.
Wow. This is a very, very emotional moment. I'm looking around. Not only am I seeing people that I know, but it brings back memories beyond belief. Thank you so much for coming. Wow. Okay. I do have a script. I have to put my glasses on. Okay. Turn the microphone. What? No. Thank you anyway. Paul. Oh my. Paul was the love of my life. Paul's first wife had died of cancer. They had 3 daughters, Karen, Debbie, and Jerry. Now I got to find my place again. I was divorced and had a son, John, daughter, Sue, and raised my niece, Deb. Paul was thinking of dating, and it had been a year since his wife had died. We met and talked and talked and talked. My daughter said, "Mom, how was it?" I said, "Oh, Suze, he's a very special man." The understatement of the year. We had a lovely ceremony. We bought a house in Belmont, and we had a key ceremony and gave each family a key so they could know they were always welcome. And they were. It's a happy, sad day. I miss the love of my life terribly. And blessed by the wonderful family, amen, and many good friends and people that we love. Thank you so much for coming today. And that's it.
It's not like preparing what you did for your summer vacation. I look around and I'm struck by how many different aspects of my life, my dad's life, are represented here and how many people he touched. For some of you, he was Dr. Solomon. For others, Selectman Solomon. Town meeting member, medical colleague, neighbor, friends, Uncle Paul, Grandpa, just Paul. I had the extraordinary privilege of calling him Dad. And I really lucked out in the dad department. By the way, I'm Karen, and I go by Karina because would you be a Karen? Dad could call me Karen because he didn't think of it that way. I was born in Verdun, France in 1956 while Dad was serving as a flight surgeon in the Air Force. He loved to remind me that my birth cost him a bottle of Chivas. He bought a light blue 1957 Volkswagen Bug off the assembly line in Munich, removed the back seat to make a playpen for me, and our little family traveled throughout Europe for the first 14 months of my life. Though I don't remember specifically those travels, they've always lived inside me. Dad loved to travel, other cultures, and people. Our basement walls were covered with National Geographic magazines, and one of his favorite sayings was, "If you can speak English and have a sense of humor, you can navigate anything." Dad adored the theater, and musicals in particular. He could sit down at the piano and play almost anything by ear, including Broadway show tunes. And thanks to my sister Jerry, you'll hear some of his favorites today. So, one of my earliest memories is walking down the stairs of our apartment in Cambridge when I was about 4 years old and proudly announcing, "Daddy, I can whistle." And I proceeded to whistle "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" in tune. When I finished, he smiled and simply said, "Yes, you got my ear." Years later, when I was 14 and a decent flute player, I decided classical music and the marching band was no longer cool for my rebellious teenage self. Mom threatened to sell my flute, but Dad wouldn't let her. I'm very grateful he said no, because a few years later, in a pretty hippie scene in Vermont, I thought, oh, there's jamming? And I picked up the flute again, and I still play it. And I'm so grateful to have inherited his ear for music. I was always proud that my dad was a pediatrician, and that I was equally proud that he served the town he loved. Here we are, town meeting, town hall. Everywhere we went in Belmont, Dad ran into people he knew, greeting all generations with his genuine warmth. When I was 10 and Deb was 8, we campaigned door to door in Precinct 1 with Dad when he first ran for town meeting. Years later, in this very building, I registered to vote, and Dad's advice was simple. "Daughter, we're Democrats, the other people are Republicans, and we all agree to disagree." I used to love going to Dad's office to help him out on Saturday mornings on the next block, right on Moore Street. I remember him always being so kind and patient with the children and their parents, and sometimes I go with him when he made rounds to see newborns. I can still picture his big hands gently cradling a tiny baby while he checked out their ears, eyes, heart, and reflexes. Even outside the office, he was always Dr. Solomon. When we went sledding, his doctor's bag was never far away in case somebody got hurt. Dad had high standards. I heard more than once, "Nothing less than an A is acceptable, young lady." No pressure there. Dad also had a legendary sweet tooth, which unfortunately I've inherited. Whenever Mom baked dessert, she'd make a double batch and freeze half for another day. My favorite was her thin chocolate squares. They were great frozen and carefully wrapped, and they'd be tucked away in the downstairs freezer for guests after the symphony or theater. Somehow, Dad and I always seemed to bump into one another at the basement freezer. One by one, we'd help ourselves, carefully wrapping up what was left so Mom wouldn't notice. A few days later, she'd pull out the package before company arrived, only to discover that there were 2 left. Dad and I suddenly became remarkably poor at making eye contact. And then there was the helium balloon incident. Deb and I begged Dad to inhale helium because we wanted to hear his voice get squeaky. Of course, he wasn't about to do that without first consulting his physician's desk reference to make sure helium wasn't going to permanently damage anything. It's true. Once he determined it was perfectly safe, he inhaled. At that exact moment, his office phone rang. Dad was on call. Without missing a beat, he answered, "Dr. Solomon, Dr. Solomon." Deb and I laughed until we cried. She's laughing now. In 1974, when I was 18 and determined to travel overland from Munich to Kathmandu with my then older boyfriend, he was 20, my Harvard-educated doctor dad was understandably horrified. Of course he expected his eldest daughter to go to college, not disappear onto the hippie trail. But once he realized I was determined to go, he made sure I had my inoculations. He made sure he packed me a first aid kit. And since Dad never traveled anywhere without a camera, and our closets were filled with little yellow boxes of 35mm slides documenting our family adventures, it probably shouldn't have surprised me when he handed Dave $50 for film, which went a long way for film in 1974. It didn't occur to me until years later that Dad wasn't simply helping us buy film. He was making sure our journey would come home with us. When I returned home 8.5 months later, Dad handed me a shoebox containing all 76 letters I'd written home to friends and family. He had saved every one. He smiled and said, "These are wonderful. I want a book, kid." On his 90th birthday, I fulfilled his request and handed him my memoir, Hitchhiking to Kathmandu, My Overland Odyssey. I've sold 5. That moment meant more to both of us than I can possibly express. In 1985, our mom, Jackie, succumbed to cancer after a 2-year battle. She was 54 and Dad was 57. A year later, Dad met Phil, who quickly became the love of his life. The evening before their wedding, they handed keys to their new home, to all 5 of their combined children, myself, Deb, Jerry, John, and Sue. And they named us their significant crew. The family grew to include 7 beloved grandchildren, every one of whom brought Dad enormous pride and joy. In recent years, Dad was absolutely delighted to welcome 3 great-grandchildren as well. They're entertaining us today. They were themed Thanksgivings, endless laughter, gratitude, and even costumes. One year, when the Thanksgiving theme was Harry Potter, Dad arrived as Professor Dumbledore, while Phil was Professor McGonagall. The rest of us happily wore our Harry Potter glasses. Another year, Dad's granddaughters, Amanda, Bailey, and Casey, hosted a Thanksgiving Academy Awards ceremony and presented Oscars to everyone in the family. Dad received the kindest Oscar. Dad received the Oscar for most kind, and none of us was surprised. Dad died on April 15th, just a few moments before midnight. My 70th birthday began on April 16th. For nearly 70 years, I had the extraordinary privilege of calling Paul Solomon my dad. I really did luck out in the dad department. And the year before he died, through tears of gratitude, I thanked him for being such a wonderful father, and he smiled and said, "That's so good to hear." I said, "Love you, Dad," and he replied, "Love you, kid." And finally, Dad believed life was meant to be shared with family, with friends, around a table, and yes, occasionally with a good bottle of wine. Not that many years ago, Belmont's antiquated blue laws meant restaurants couldn't serve alcohol. Dad thought people should be able to enjoy a glass of wine with dinner at a local restaurant. So in true Paul Solomon fashion, he helped change the law. Because that's who Dad was. If something mattered to him, family, community, conversation, or simply making life a little better, he showed up and did something about it. So please, join me in a proverbial toast to Paul Solomon. Here's to a life extraordinarily well lived. Love you, Dad.
You gotta have heart. All you really need is heart. When the odds are saying you'll never win, that's when the grin should start. You gotta have hope. Mustn't sit around and mope. Nothing's half as bad as it may appear. Wait till next year and hope. When your luck is batting 0, get your chin up off the floor. Mister, you can be a hero. You can open any door. There's nothing to it but to do it. You gotta have heart. Miles and miles and miles of heart. Oh, it's fine to be a genius, of course, but keep that old horse before the cart. First, you gotta have heart. When your luck is batting 0, get your chin up off the floor. Mister, you can be a hero. You can can open any door. There's nothing to it but to do it. You gotta have heart. Miles and miles and miles of heart. Oh, it's fine to be a genius, of course, but keep that old horse before the cart. First you gotta have heart. Yes, you gotta have heart.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Pauker. My time with Paul Solomon started with the tall ships, the first tall ships. I was extremely great with child, and Paul was able to come join our pediatric group at Harvard Community Health Plan in time to cover my maternity leave. That little bicentennial baby boy had his 50th birthday last week. So, of course, the tall ships had to come back and celebrate that. Some of you are probably going down there today. Well, Dr. Paul Solomon came from a thriving solo pediatric practice in Belmont. Some of you might have been parents of patients, but at least one is a grandmother. One of his babies is a grandmother already. So he had a thriving practice. The people I know whom he cared for just adored him, flat out. And on top of it, he was selectman. To stay, okay? And so on top of it, he was a selectman who was adored in the whole town of Belmont. And his practice, he had one assistant, no nurse, no secretaries, no beeper, no system of administration. And instead, he came to join us on July 3rd, 1976, and showed up at the reception desk in Cambridge. So Cambridge in the 70s. A hippie lady with a t-shirt was on the phone, eventually puts down the phone. He's wearing a dark suit and tie and is totally ready to practice in our group. And lo and behold, the lady looks up and goes, "Oh, you must be Paul." He never recovered. He told me that story the last time I was with him. It was such a big deal for him as a phenomenal change in status to be welcomed in that way. We didn't practice pediatrics. We loved it. We loved it. We loved our patients. We loved what we were doing. We cared for them as we wish people would do today. It was his style, it was his standards, it's who he was. We worked next door to each other, and he would, when he was worried about a patient, whether it was genetic problem, he would say, you know, come by my office at 10 o'clock and see what you think of this patient. So it was my first curbside genetics consult, and I would go in and say, "Hi, I'm just returning this book," or something like that, and then later tell him what I thought about what the diagnosis of the patient might be. He taught me how to care for children, how to care for children. He adored and cherished his daughters. They were everything for him. Even Karen in India when you called or something and said there was a problem and he's trying to deal with it across international phones. Debbie, he gave me the privilege of trying to encourage to go into medicine. Jerry and their mom, pure love, pure love. When they got the house in Belmont, they had a room for Jerry, who was still in college. Woo! He went on to become an administrator at Harvard Community Health Plan, where he was trusted and cherished. He helped us figure out things like retirement plans, which we'd never heard of. We were all fresh from our training, brand new practice, and he thought about the future. He thought about how to pay for his kids' education, and we were thinking about having kids. There were 3 of us who were very, very close. Our birthdays were 3 days apart. The husband of our dearest Ronnie Peterson, some of you may know, and Paul and I, we would have our birthday parties together. And this year, it's just me. So time passes. When Jackie had passed away, Paul became the most eligible bachelor in the history of Boston. I hope none of you dated him, but you may remember that he was tall and handsome, intelligent, a leader in Belmont, a senior, outstanding pediatrician. And so one day he goes, "I'd like you to meet someone." So people were fixing him up. People he didn't know were fixing him up. And he said, "I'd like you to meet someone." So we went to Pier 4, my husband and his new lady and I. And in those times I didn't need a purse or a pocketbook. I would just put my lipstick in my husband's pocket. And so it was time to go to the ladies' room after dinner, and I invited Phyllis to join me. She reaches into Paul's pocket and takes out her lipstick. And so it goes. Paul, I hope there's a God, and I hope God is comforting you, welcoming you, and reminding you how much we loved and adored you, and hope that your memory will live on in all of our hearts.
Doesn't work. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, I've had the unique lifelong opportunity to share a birthday with my dad. The second of 3 daughters. I was born on his 30th birthday. It's a special bond I've always had with him. We were close. He was a great dad, and he was my go-to person well into my early adulthood when I was stressed, or even when I wasn't stressed. He always listened, he believed in me, and he had my back. I always knew I was fortunate to have such a dad. I was proud of him, and I believed in him. Dad loved kids, and he loved people. He talked about taking care of his patients and their families. As a teen, I worked in Dad's Belmont private practice on Saturdays and witnessed and witness the great love he shared with his patients. I got to witness his conversations with parents and his tender examinations of babies. He respected his patients so much that one year in the 70s, he even put up a voting box for whether he should keep or shave off his beard. When Dad ultimately closed his Belmont practice to join the new Harvard Community Health Plan, his patients threw an enormous party for him. He eventually went on to create, I eventually went on to create my own career in medicine. Well, I won't say I walked in Dad's footsteps. I do credit him for instilling in me a sense of curiosity, wonder, service, and a deep love of people. Dad loved fun, but he was guileless. He also was an avid Red Sox fan, and we regularly went to games at Fenway Park, sometimes with great seats gifted to Dad from patients with season tickets. Those concepts do go together. I'll get to it. In May of 1968, Dad was turning 40, and I was turning 10. Mom, Jackie, who had a keen sense of mischief, was planning a surprise 40th birthday party for Dad, and the plan was for Uncle Hank to take Dad, me, and my sister Karina, and our cousins Ron and David to the Red Sox game, while Mom and Aunt Eleanor set up for the party. Mom had planned for months and sent all attendees a suggested start for cards for Dad. We never called you Shorty, but now we'll call you 40. After the game, as we drove up Bright Road, Dad wondered why there were so many cars. We had to park at a distance and walk. As we approached 67 Bright Road, Jerry, then just 2.5, came running out saying, "Daddy, come see all the people." It dawned on him only when we entered the house to a chorus of "Happy Birthday." He had missed all the clues for months. He laughed at every card and marveled for years at the coincidence that they all started with the same rhyme. We never called you Shorty, but now we'll call you 40. In August of that year, Dad and I went to a night game at Fenway. The seats, a gift from a patient, were the best ever. The first 2 front row seats on the first base side of the home plate net. There was a rain delay, but no one seemed to leave. Dad and I just put up umbrellas and chatted. The rain continued, and then an amazing thing happened. Carl Yastrzemski, Tony Canigliaro, and Reggie Smith came out of the dugout almost right in front of us and started a contest to see who could throw a ball into the left field green monster. Yaz hit the wall and the crowd roared, but Reggie Smith cleared it for a home run. The crowd went wild. The game was canceled, but it's still my favorite baseball memory. And I got to share it, just me and Dad. And thanks to AI, I hear they now call it the Dugout Olympics. I had no idea. So playing sports with Dad was cool too, but I learned that it was best to be on the same side with him. Because it was really good throwing a baseball with him, but like with tennis or ping pong, he had a really mean left-handed topspin that he had no control over. But he would win by attrition because I was just running all the time. So Dad loved to travel. He spent endless hours planning trips, reading travel books and history, and taking notes in his lefty scrawl that only he could read. The most memorable part of travel with Dad was the unexpected. It seemed that there was always someone he knew, often a patient, who would call out to him in an airport or a plaza. In 1974, I traveled with a group in Europe, and then I met up with Dad and Mom and Jerry in Munich with a plan to see Vienna and Salzburg, but we got the word that Dad's dad, my grandpa, was dying, and so Dad arranged a flight out of Heathrow Airport and planned the most amazing night cab tour of London the night before we flew home. But my favorite trips with Dad were closer to home, like Sandy Island, the family camp in Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire, where we spent weeks in the summer and got to play father-daughter doubles in tennis or shuffleboard. Dad was always in service to his patients as a pediatrician, to his community. As a town meeting member, selectman, he was really a statesman. He also volunteered on various boards in his professional life and as a citizen of the town of Belmont. It seems he often was in positions of leadership which he carried gracefully and quietly. He listened well, was respectful and respected. Lost my place. He was a voice of reason and often was called on to moderate civic disputes. He was not a religious man, nor did he have a clear spiritual leaning, but he carried himself with integrity, love, and a sense of faith in his own moral compass in doing the right thing. Dad was only 57 when Mom died and left him a widower after 33 years of marriage. After a year or more, he asked his daughters how we felt about him dating. Dad was not suited to single life. I was enthusiastic about him dating, and I believe my sisters were as well. I think we all wanted Dad to move on to a new relationship and a new adventure. I knew he had found his person the first time he told me about Phil. They bought a beautiful house on Lambert Road in Belmont, married there, and nearly seamlessly blended their two families, which they dubbed the Significant Crew. We all sang the Brady Bunch song at their wedding. Over many years, their house became the hub for the crew and numerous multi-generational gatherings of family and friends. Dad and Phil were a great team. They seemed to nurture the best in each other to create a beautiful life together. And I was delighted to watch Dad grow and expand with his growing family, which, with grandkids, was big enough one year to simulate a Thanksgiving banquet at Hogwarts. Dad, of course, playing Dumbledore. Beyond the large gatherings, Dad and Phil's Lambert home was our home base for Boston area visits, whether we lived in Rhode Island or then much further away in New Mexico. And with or without Stephen and me present, they were amazing grandparents to our boys, Derek and Wiley. From hosting them for Habitat Summer Camp, to walking on the beach or attending Paw Sox games with us in Rhode Island, to traveling to New Mexico to take the boys to Mesa Verde. When Stephen and I needed to travel, to taking them each to Europe when they turned 13. They created memorable moments with every visit. Dad lived a truly wonderful life. In his final few years, he often bounced back from life-threatening scares, determined to live to 100. I know it was his love for family, and especially for Phil, that kept him going as long as he could. When he passed on April 15th of this year, he was a month short of 98. He'd been married 38 and a half years to Phil. Following a 33-year marriage to my mom, Jackie, he leaves behind a beautiful blended legacy of the families he created, the families he cared for, and all the people he touched along the way with his words and his wisdom, his listening and his kindness, and his genuine interest in others. If you ever had the sense that Paul Solomon heard you, saw you, and that you were his total focus in any given moment, it was real. That was the way he was, and I'm sure why we're all here today. Thank you for being here.
Kiss today goodbye. The sweetness and the sorrow. Wish me luck the same to you. But I can't regret what I did for love, what I did for love. Look, my eyes are dry. The gift was ours to borrow. It's as if we always knew. And I won't forget what I did for love, what I did for love. Gone, love is never gone. As we travel on, love's what we'll remember. Kiss today goodbye and point me toward tomorrow. We did what we had to do. Won't forget, can't regret what I did for love. What I did for love. What I did for love. Love is never gone as we travel on. Love's what we'll remember. Kiss today goodbye and point me toward tomorrow. We did what we had to do. Won't forget, can't regret what I did for love. What I did for love. What I did for love.
So I'm Will Brownsberger. I'm state senator, and I had the great privilege of serving with Paul as a town meeting member, and then for 5 years together on the select board in Belmont. Paul was, I'm going to turn this off. Paul was a true public servant. He contributed so much to this community. He served for decades on town meeting, chaired our Vision 21 process, and served for 6 years in total on the select board. He was, of course, first of all, a physician, someone who gave his life to caring for people, and in particular, to caring for children. Now, a pediatrician has to have special listening skills, the ability to make a child comfortable in talking, and to listen carefully to what they're saying with their undeveloped language skills and their limited understanding of what's happening to them. So he was a great active listener, someone who really saw and heard his patients. Now, those listening skills are central to good public service. He was somebody who really listened to, saw, and cared for his constituents. Also, as a physician, he was someone who was responsible. He made life and death decisions or recommendations for people. He was very thoughtful. He did his homework, and he was decisive. He was capable of putting his mind around an issue and taking a position. Central attributes for public leadership. He was a natural leader, and others in many other contexts recognized his talents. Through his career, he developed valuable organizational experience in those leadership positions which people gave to him, serving in the Air Force and rising to leadership roles in Harvard Community Health and in other organizations as a physician. Now, whether from his natural gifts or from his experience, he brought to the select board a good intuitive sense, I should say a great intuitive sense, of how to lead the town in a collaborative way, how to fit in and work with all the other town leaders, some elected, some appointed, all of whom were also trying to serve the common good in their own way. He had good judgment about what to get involved with and what not to get involved with, where he could help and where it was better for him not to rush in. He was a very effective member of the select board and a joy to serve with at the table across the hall. He was always cool-tempered and always funny. He asked the right questions, and he articulated clearly what he thought. He added enormous value in every thought process. It should be acknowledged that Paul's election in 2002 was a watershed election. For decades, there had been intense factional competition in town. You'd have an election, you'd have 100 people holding signs on one side of the street, 100 people holding signs on the other side of the street. We just don't have that anymore in Belmont. Paul ran for the select board in his 70s with no motive but to do good. And when he won, he showed charity to all and malice toward none. With his election, the town was able to transcend that factionalism. We do, of course, still have very bitter emotional conflicts about public policy. That's inevitable. But we no longer divide along hardened lines of factional competition. His contributions live on in all of us and in the community around us. He was a wonderful and true public servant.
Growing up here in Belmont, I often felt a little bit like a celebrity because I was Paul Solomon's daughter. Once someone made that connection, they'd say, "Oh, your dad." And then they'd tell me a story about an interaction they had with him and the impression he had left. I don't think he ever thought of himself as a celebrity. He lived a life of service in the most humble and impactful way, simply by being who he was: smart, warm, funny, kind, caring, and truly interested in people. Since his passing, I've heard so many stories, and they have similar themes. He made people feel safe and seen. He listened with genuine interest. He met people where they were and believed in them, often before they fully believed in themselves. Many of my high school classmates were his patients, so I shared his obituary on our class Facebook group. There were dozens of comments, and I want to share a couple of them. One person wrote, "He was a great man and doctor. I was afraid of everything as a kid, but he made me feel at ease." Another shared, "He was our pediatrician and the kindest man. To this day, we still compare doctors to the standard of Dr. Solomon." Those qualities were not just how he practiced medicine, they were how he lived life as a father, grandfather, husband, uncle, friend, and citizen of Belmont. I have a unique perspective as his youngest daughter. When my sisters were growing up, Dad was building his career and working very long hours. By the time I came along, he had a little more work-life balance. We spent a lot of time together, just the two of us. As a young tween, he'd drive me to school in Cambridge on his way to his Harvard Community Health Plan office. The route took us through Fresh Pond and its multiple rotaries at rush hour. Even though I was years away from driving, he'd narrate as we'd maneuver through. "Make the decision. Commit to it. Don't stop. You have the right of way." At the time, I thought it was a premature driving lesson. Now I see it as a life lesson, too. Even before those carpool days, I remember the mornings he'd have call-in hour from his desk in our home. He'd sit with his coffee, OJ, and toast, answering calls from concerned parents about their sick children. He had all the time in the world for each one of them. He'd ask questions. He'd listen. He'd take notes. He'd reassure them. And then he would calmly tell them what to do. "Give her Tylenol. Bring him to the office. I'll check in with you later tonight." I didn't know it at the time, but I was listening to a master class on how to treat people. Dad was definitely a man of strong convictions, but he was also open-minded. He was willing to learn, change his mind, and admit when he was wrong, and I think that's what made him a really good leader and father. When I decided to start my floral design business, I asked him for a small loan. Sitting at the dinner table with him and Phil, I began to lay out my case. But before I could get to the ask, he interrupted me and said, "How much do you need?" That was a big deal. But became an even bigger deal when he told me that years earlier, my mother Jackie had asked him for $500 to start her interior design business, and he said no. He explained, "Jerry, it was the late 70s. I couldn't understand why your mom wanted to work. After all, my income could support our family." He knew that he had made a mistake with Jackie and recognized that supporting me without question was a way to right that wrong. Nothing brought a bigger smile to Dad's face than a young child. I do know that pediatrics was his calling, and I think it's very appropriate that the children have been very vocal here today. When our son Jason was born, Dad and Phil came to the hospital to meet him. He sat there with Jason on his lap, admiring him the way any grandparent would. And then the pediatrician reflexes kicked in. He ran his hands down Jason's arms and legs and torso, the professional version of checking for 10 fingers and toes. And then he exclaimed, "What a beautiful body. Perfect proportions." And in that moment, I saw the grandfather and the pediatrician fully merged into one. Dad passed many of his loves on to me, especially art, history, travel, and theater. One of my fondest memories is sitting at the piano while he played show tunes and we sang together. As I grew older, my birthday presents were often tickets to the hot musical coming to Boston. The last show we saw together was Hamilton. And as I started to think about what to write for today, the obvious lyric came to mind. You can say it with me if you'd like. What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. Well, Dad. Oh, he's not there anymore. Okay. Well, Dad, you had almost 98 years on this planet. We see that garden. It's blooming and thriving. We see it in the good work you did for Belmont. We see it in the confidence and growth you supported in your patients, your colleagues, and your students. We see it in the vibrant lives of the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren that we lovingly call the significant crew. We see it in your long and loving marriages to Jackie and Phil, two tremendous women. And we see it in the way you lived your life as an ordinary man who built an extraordinary life full of love, service, curiosity, humor, and care. The world could certainly benefit from more people who live by the standards of Dr. Solomon. Well done, Dad. You will always be with me, but for now I'll say goodbye with your signature sign-off that all the children loved. See you around. So long. Thank you. There he is. So hopefully you all have put in your words for the word cloud. And one more opportunity? Would people like to? Okay, hold on. What do we do? Here's the QR code. Hold on. Hold on. There's your QR code. If you point your camera to the QR code, a little yellow sign is going to come up. You can click on that, and then you can put in the words to describe Paul. And we'll create a word cloud, which is a collage of words. Good? Need a couple more minutes? Couple more minutes.
join me in singing a rousing chorus of "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning"? The words are on the back of your program. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. The corn is as high as an elephant's eye, and it looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I've got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way. All the cattle are standing like statues. All the cattle are standing like statues. They don't blink an eye as they see me ride by. And a little brown maverick is winking her eye. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I've got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way. Third verse with a hushed excitement. Sounds of the earth are like music. The breeze is so busy it don't miss a tree. And an old weeping willer is laughing at me. Big finish. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I've got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way. Oh, what a beautiful day.
John, if I could ask you to just come up here with me real quick. I just wanted to represent the stepchildren. So my brother John and I. So we have the absolute amazing privilege of being his stepkids and never, ever felt like there was a loss or a missing link. And forever for that, I will say thank you, Dr. Paul Solomon, for being in all of our lives. Thank you for being here with us today.